The following is a recording for Dr. Rachel Bronson with the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists on Thursday, August 13th, 2015 at 11 o'clock a.m. Central Time. Excuse me, everyone. We now have all of our speakers in conference. Please be aware that each of your lines is in a listen-only mode. At the conclusion of today's presentation, we will open the floor for questions. At that time, instructions will be given as to the procedure to follow if you would like to ask a question. I would now like to turn the conference over to Dr. Rachel Bronson. Dr. Bronson, you may begin.
Thank you. Good morning or good afternoon to everybody today. I'm Rachel Bronson. I'm the Executive Director and Publisher of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. We're delighted that you're joining us today for our second installment of our Decoding the Iran Agreement teleconference series. Today's conversation provides, as you know from our announcement, a view from the White House with NSC Senior Director for Arms Control and Nonproliferation, Jon Wolfsthal. It is our second in the series, and we're very thankful for the Nuclear Threat Initiative for providing support. We can't do what we're doing without the support of partners and others like you on the call, so we thank you for that. The second in our series, last week we hosted a discussion moderated by the Atlantic Jim Fallows with three prominent arms control experts, Ole Heinonen, Frank von Hippel, and Jon Wolfsthal. And a write-up from last week's call can be, which was provided by our editor-in-chief, John Mecklin, is on our website and can be found at www.thebulletin.org. Our editor, Lucian Crowder, will write up today's call, which will be available on our website shortly. Our goal with the series is to explore the technical aspects of this arms control agreement between Iran and the P5+1. Many other organizations are discussing various aspects of the agreement. At the Bulletin, we see our main contribution as putting this nuclear agreement in context of all others and then assessing its contributions. To underscore the importance of this call, I want you all to know that we sold out today's call, and we know from the registration list that the audience represents government agencies, media, scholars, scientists, political, religious, and other civic groups from across not only the United States, but from around the world. From your names and titles on the registration list, we know this is a group that thinks deeply and seriously about nuclear arms control, and I'm looking forward to the discussion that follows. So the format today is Dr. Wolfsthal will speak for about 15 minutes or so, or 20, and then we'll open it up for questions as we did last time in a moderated discussion. So after John's remarks, an operator will join us to provide instructions for how to ask questions should you have them. And so just a little bit more on his bio. Our speaker today is Jon Wolfsthal. He's the Senior Director for Arms Control and Nonproliferation at the National Security Council. Jon, as many of you know, is a leading expert on nonproliferation, arms control, and nuclear security. From 2009 to 2012, he served as Special Advisor on Nuclear Security Matters to Vice President Biden and as Director on the National Security Council for Nonproliferation. With that, Jon, I'm happy to turn this over to you.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much, Rachel. Thank you all for calling in, and I really do want to thank not only the sponsors, but the Bulletin itself. You know, having learned a lot over the many years of my career reading articles in the Bulletin and knowing how important the contribution the Bulletin's made for education over several generations, I'm thrilled to be able to be part of something that they're organizing. And I think it's particularly appropriate given the subject of today's discussion, which is an extremely complex but an extremely important non-proliferation agreement, which is designed to focus on the same mission that the Bulletin has been dedicated to, which is preventing the spread of nuclear weapons, and in the case of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, preventing Iran from ever obtaining a nuclear weapon, which has been the central mission of our negotiations, and in fact has been the central goal of the United States dating back to the 1980s as we've watched Iran's nuclear activities progress. What I thought I would do today is basically walk through the major themes of the agreement, why we think it's not only worth the support of the American people, but why we think it's a very good non-proliferation agreement, and then knowing that there's a lot of interest in this, open up things up to questions, and happy to get into issues as people want. As I said, from our point of view, while we understand that there's a vigorous debate going on this topic, from our point of view, there really is no debating that the nuclear portions of this agreement are an incredibly strong agreement, that it not only does what we set out to do in preventing Iran from having the ability to build a nuclear weapon, to prevent them from having the fissile material needed to build a nuclear weapon, but really goes even beyond where we were in April with the Lausanne Framework Agreement in many important areas. And I'll walk through those and why we think it's so valuable. But from my point of view, the net gains on the nuclear portion are indisputable, and I think that's been borne out by a number of the endorsements that we've gotten, including from a number of renowned scientists, 32 at last count, 6 Nobel laureates, and people who are really experts on the science and technology behind this agreement. As I think the people on this call realize, one of the central tenets of our field is if you don't have nuclear materials, you can't build a nuclear weapon. And so at the core of this agreement is a verified and comprehensive program to prevent Iran from acquiring the fissile material it would need should it choose to build a nuclear weapon. There were 3 ways that could happen. All of those have been verifiably cut off under the terms of the agreement if it is fully implemented after the pending vote by Congress and the work that Iran needs to do. The first of those pathways is in many ways the most straightforward and simplest, which is that the heavy water plutonium-producing nuclear reactor that Iran was building at Arak will be reconfigured. The calandria and core will be ripped out, filled with cement so that it can never again be used, and will be redesigned so that it cannot produce anywhere near the amounts of nuclear material that are needed to produce even a single nuclear weapon. That contrasts with a reactor that, had it gone into operation, could have produced enough plutonium for 1 or 2 weapons every year. That's something that can be directly verified. The IAEA knows how to do many things in the nuclear field, perhaps none of them as well as monitoring reactor operations and spent fuel storage. The fact that all of the spent fuel from this reactor for the lifetime of the reactor will have to be shipped out of country so it is not available for misuse or diversion, to our view, is an incredibly strong and stringent set of provisions that kills the plutonium pathway for Iran. The second pathway, which involves 2 main facilities, the Natanz and Fordo facility, would have been Iran's ability to produce highly enriched uranium through centrifuge enrichment. That pathway, again, is effectively cut off through a variety of very verifiable and easily identified steps. The Fordo facility will have all of its uranium centrifuges removed. Some centrifuges will be allowed to do stable isotope separation, but no uranium will be allowed anywhere in the facility for the first 15 years of this agreement, meaning that the presence of uranium would be a clear material breach of the agreement and something that the IAEA will be able to detect, since they will have 24/7 continuous monitoring of the facility. Everybody knows why Fordo is important. It is an underground, heavily bunkered facility that we are very concerned about, had been formerly clandestine, and that is simply going to go out of the uranium enrichment business for at least 15 years. The larger of the 2 facilities at Natanz, where the bulk of Iran's current 19,000 centrifuges are installed, will be radically reconfigured. All of the piping for the 2/3 reduction of centrifuges will have to be removed, and Iran will be allowed to possess roughly 5,000 centrifuges at the facility. The rest will have to be put into IAEA monitored storage, and Iran will be capped at enrichment level of 3.67% for a significant period of time. Anything beyond that would be rapidly detected because of the modern technology the IAEA will be able to employ at the facility. And in addition, Iran's stockpile of uranium, not highly enriched uranium, not enriched uranium, their entire stockpile of uranium will be limited to 300 kilograms of uranium enriched to 3.67%, meaning that for 15 years. So that if at any point in that first 15 years Iran tried to build a bomb, that material would leave them at least 3/4 of a weapon short, and so they would have to import significant quantities, significant amounts of uranium, which again is a very highly detectable activity. And since they would have to enrich it at Natanz or Fordo, where the IAEA is going to have 24/7 monitoring, we have very high confidence that we could detect any of that activity very rapidly. The third pathway is, of course, the one that most people will be worried about, is the clandestine pathway. And we're right to be worried about it because Iran has a long history of pursuing clandestine nuclear facilities. We, of course, have a very long history of detecting Iran trying to build clandestine nuclear facilities and making them non-clandestine. And we have pretty high confidence that we can do so again in the future for any significant facility that Iran might build to handle or process nuclear materials. The clandestine pathway is approached through a variety of means, not only through the implementation of the IAEA's additional protocol, which provides for all manner of access and transparency, but also because for the first 15 years, and actually longer of this agreement, the IAEA will have the ability to monitor the entire fuel cycle in Iran, going back to both uranium mines, so that Iran will have no domestic source of uranium, and we will have the ability to monitor Iran's centrifuge production and subcomponent production, so that Iran will have no ability to produce and divert centrifuges without us detecting it, and all of the nuclear or nuclear-related equipment or materials that Iran might want for its legitimized nuclear program will have to be acquired through a established procurement pathway, so that if Iran tries to import a pencil that is intended for use in nuclear matters and it does not go through the procurement channel, it could be determined as a material breach of the agreement, allowing the United States to snap back sanctions through its own unilateral authority at the UN. And so we believe very effectively, and without getting into classified matters, we're very confident that our intelligence community believes that we have the ability to effectively monitor this agreement in a way that builds our case that this is a very notable achievement for nonproliferation. Another couple of words, and then I'll open things up to questions. There have been a number of controversies over how the IAEA is going to do their work, both moving forward and dealing with the issue of the possible military dimensions of Iran's previous nuclear program that dates back to 2003. All I'll say on this is, for those people that are familiar with the IAEA, they understand that it's very important that the IAEA have the ability to implement their safeguards through their normal safeguards confidential process. Not only does the United States, but many other countries, in fact all other countries that have agreements with the IAEA, use safeguards confidential documentation. We do that because we don't want the processes by which the IAEA conducts inspections and monitoring to be open to people who might try to subvert them, but more importantly because we don't want proliferation-sensitive information to be made available to states or subnational groups that might be interested in pursuing them. And so there's a very important principle at stake when we deal with safeguards confidentiality, and one the United States has championed for many years. By the way, I'll also note that Israel, which has nuclear facilities under safeguards, also has safeguards confidential agreements with the IAEA. And then the last thing, and to me this is perhaps the most interesting and challenging of the critiques that have come out about the agreement, is the question of the time-bound nature with which the IAEA can gain access to any facility in Iran that it chooses to be interested in. The fact is that right now, on no country on the planet can the IAEA request access and be granted that access no matter what within 24 days. We know that Iran has successfully dragged out the process of access to Parchin for many years. There are other examples where the IAEA has tried to gain access and has been delayed for many months, if not longer. The fact is that under this agreement, once the IAEA requests access to a facility in Iran, they will get access in no more than 24 days. In some cases, it will be in as little as 2 hours. In many cases, it will be in no more than 24 hours. But the outside range of when the IAEA will get access is 24 days. And as Ernie Moniz, the Secretary of Energy and the former head of the physics department at the MIT, has said, while it's possible that Iran might be able to do some tangential and related research or schematics into weaponization aspects, they can't do anything with nuclear materials that could be cleaned up in 24 days that we wouldn't be able to catch. And we know that because we've been working very concertedly to ensure that our capabilities are able to do exactly that. And so the fact that critics are pointing at what is undoubtedly a strength of the agreement and that Iran will have no place left to hide should it try to skirt around the contours of this agreement, to me has been surprising, but one that we're happy to have a debate on, because we think the more people understand the agreement, the more support we will get. I think that's clearly been true in the terms of the letters that have been written in, and also in terms of the growing support that we see in the U.S. Congress. So with that, I think it's probably enough to get started on, and I'm happy to take any questions people have.
Great.
All right.
Thank you so much, Jon. I'll turn it over to Chelsea.
At this time, we will open the floor for questions. If you would like to ask a question, please press the star key followed by the 1 key on your touch-tone phone now. Questions will be taken in the order in which they are received. If at any time you would like to remove yourself from the questioning queue, just press star 2. Again, to ask a question, please press star 1.
Chelsea, but as we're waiting for questions to come in, Jon, if I just might ask you to talk, we've had some questions in how this current agreement relates to the NPT. And I know that Secretary Moniz has been talking about how Iran should never be able to get the bomb. And in that, he seems to be referring to this joint plan plus how it relates to the NPT. And I was wondering if you could just talk through that a little bit, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Sure. Well, as people on the call know, the Non-Proliferation Treaty is the cornerstone of the global effort to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. And Iran violated that agreement through violating its IAEA Safeguards Agreement. It was found in non-compliance. So in addition to the political and the legal obligation under the NPT, we felt it was simply insufficient for Iran to say, oh, well, we mean it this time. And so in the JCPOA, we have negotiated not only a further legal obligation for Iran not to pursue nuclear weapons, but have developed a long list of prescribed activities, all of the things that would be needed for Iran to develop a nuclear explosive package, including many things that are legitimate dual-use technologies that Iran currently is legally able to pursue, and that many other countries around the world are able to pursue. And those restrictions are permanent, so that if in 30 years Iran says, well, we really want to use some streak high-speed cameras to develop our conventional military capability, they'll be forever prohibited from engaging in that activity, which is something that will restrict their ability to develop with any reliability a nuclear weapon. And so we have longer-term and in some cases permanent restrictions that reinforce the goals of the NPT. In the case of Iran, were justified because of their past violation of that agreement.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
All right, and our first question will come from Douglas Riley.
It's not a question, it's a comment. I worked 38 years at Los Alamos National Laboratory, the IAEA, and several other organizations. And one of the programs I developed, in addition to the instruments, was a training program for the IAEA Safeguards Inspectors. These folks are damn good. Now, again, I have a biased view because I worked with them. I know many of them. I spent 4 years in the training section of the IAEA, and it's just a comment. Basically, I know all the inspectors we've trained all of them for 2 to more weeks in the measurements that they make using instruments that we've developed and others. So that's my comment.
Doug, first, thanks for calling in, and it's nice to hear your voice. And I think it's extremely valuable for people who do understand what the IAEA does and who they are to do exactly what you're doing, which is to talk about it. We are finding that we have to re-educate or re-inform members of Congress and their staff about exactly what the IAEA is and what they do and how we make it possible for them to do what they do. And so, we're glad to have that opportunity because the IAEA is still the best bargain that the United States makes every year in terms of protecting our security and that of our allies. And I think we can be, and you should be very proud of the contribution we make to training the inspectors, providing them with technology, capabilities, and making sure that they can do their jobs effectively.
If I'm still on, I'm proud of what I've done, and I would just emphasize that I agree with everything you've said.
That makes me feel pretty good. Thanks, Doug.
Okay, our next question will come from Richard White.
Hi, that's a two-part question. First, Rich White, Hudson Institute. First, there was a lot of surprisingly extended cooperation between Russia, China, and the U.S. in the Iran negotiations, and I'm wondering if that's still holding in the post phase. I haven't really seen much evidence about what the three are doing to make sure that the agreement is going to be implemented as agreed. And then, more positively, has the cooperation in regard to Iran been able to impart more momentum to their relations with regard to some other non-proliferation issues such as Korea, Middle East weapons mass production free zone, or other related issues?
So, Richard, thanks. Look, I think everybody was very gratified, and especially given the hard work it took to keep the P5+1 unified and organized here. There's no doubt that there was a confluence of interest in ensuring that Iran does not build a nuclear bomb and that we actually reach a diplomatic solution. And so I think we've seen both a seriousness in the broader discussions with the P5+1 and other states, quite frankly. And I think with regards to planning for the implementation of this deal, which is still pending given the timeline built in by the UN Security Council resolution and by the agreement itself, I think is moving apace. So I think we're watching it very closely, but we're comfortable with where we are. We hope and we continue to chew gum and walk at the same time that we're working on multiple issues. We're doing a lot of work on things related to the post NPT review conference follow-up. That includes work on the Middle East zone. We expect Iran will be very vocal in their non-aligned movement activities and supporting global push towards disarmament. And in some ways, I think this will reinforce their position because they are agreeing to severe constraints on their nuclear program, and it gives them a strong position to argue that other countries should also be making compromises. That happens to be in conformity with the U.S. point of view, which is that other countries need to be focused, like we are, on reducing the nuclear danger and reducing their reliance on nuclear weapons. And so we think to the extent that that's additive, it can be very helpful.
Thank you.
Okay, our next question will come from Ori Nisim-Levi.
Yes, thank you very much for letting me in this conference.
Ori, we can't hear you. Ori, can you?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Okay, go ahead. Yes, we can hear you now. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. This is Mr. Levy from Israel. And two things to mention before my questions. One of that my area of expertise is a nuclear defense assessment. And let me just mention that I'm a colonel in the Israeli army. And what I'm speaking now is not the opinion of the army, but my opinion. This agreement with Iran has some benefits and some problems, and we don't know that we cannot get the perfect world. However, the country in the Middle East, and we may assume together that some countries in the Middle East are not are very responsible. They will get some kind of approval to even want or go ahead to a nuclear, maybe power station or nuclear warhead, what they want. And my question is, what kind of measurement, if any, the USA U.S. government may want to take about this problem?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Ori, for the question, and it is something that we are very focused on. We have talked about the risk that should Iran obtain a nuclear weapon, that not only would that put tremendous pressure on us and our allies, including you, and that's one of the main reasons that the President has said he will never allow that to happen, but that we're also very concerned about how states in the region would respond. Interestingly, as Iran has been making this push from having no centrifuges back in 2000 to having now 19,000 installed, we have not seen a wholesale march on the part of countries like Saudi Arabia or UAE or Turkey down the nuclear direction. What we have seen is them pushing us to ensure that we effectively prevent Iran from acquiring this capability, something that we have done, we believe, with this agreement. And so it's clear that the countries in the region recognize that that if they move in that direction, it's not only additive, it's not additive to their security. It actually puts them in a worse world, in a worse situation. But it makes it much harder for the United States to work with them to protect them. That the United States is not going to be able to have the same sort of defense and security relationship with states in the region if they try to match Iran's capabilities. And in fact, were they to do so in violation of their non-proliferation commitments, they would face not only the prospect of very severe sanctions, but also, if they wanted an arrangement like Iran, very intrusive restrictions, inspections, and constraints on anything they might do. So it is something we watch very carefully, and quite frankly, it is an argument we make very strongly to our Congress when we say, if you're concerned about a regional arms race, the worst thing you could do is reject this agreement. Because then you will have an Iran that gets both sanctions relief and will not face any constraints on its nuclear program and could be weeks away from building a nuclear bomb should it choose to do so. So from our point of view, it is something we're very concerned about. We also are constantly looking at what our intelligence capabilities are, what our engagement with these individual countries are, and quite frankly, it's what drives our negotiating approach when it comes to nuclear cooperation agreements with these countries. Right now, the UAE is legally bound not to have enrichment or reprocessing. We're seeking similar terms in a number of our agreements with other countries, and so it's something that definitely motivates not only our approach to the region, but in our view reinforces the importance of this deal.
Thank you.
All right, our next question will come from William Brinkman, and again, to ask a question, please press *1.
Hi, this is Bill Brinkman. I just have one question. Frequently in the papers, you read about the fact that people claim that this 24-day window is easily bypassed by the Iranians in the sense that the first notification they get from IAEA will not start the clock. It's only when they respond that the clock starts. Is there any truth to that? When I read the document, I have a hard time seeing how that's true, but I'm curious what you have to say.
Sure. I mean, look, there will be situations where the IAEA gets information either through its own resources or that's provided by member states that is not linked to a specific facility. It might be a procurement that looks weird. It might be a sample that shows up in a place that doesn't make any sense. And the IAEA may simply want to request clarification from the IAEA. And they are able to do so. And the IAEA, the Iranians have to respond in a reasonable period of time, both covered under the additional protocol and the JCPOA. But that's not defined in a set period of time. However, the IAEA may also have an interest in a discrepancy that relates to a specific facility. Let's call it a building in Tehran. And the IAEA can go to Iran and say, there are some discrepancies, we want some clarification regarding activity A, B, and C, and in order to clarify that, we want access to this building in Tehran. There's nothing that prohibits the IAEA, and in fact we would expect there are many cases where they would seek both clarification and access at the exact same time. And at that point, the clock starts. Iran must respond in a set period of time. If they do not, it would then be elevated to a dispute committee, and we would be able to then force Iran within 24 days of the original request to provide access, and there's nothing they can do to prevent that.
Good.
All right.
Thank you. John, let me just jump in here with a question. It comes back to the question on inspectors. Talking with someone who had worked on Los Alamos too, and his concern was that who are the IAEA inspectors, and he would have been more comfortable if there was some acknowledgement that Americans would be on these teams. How do you think about that?
Well, on the one hand, it's like saying, who's the lab technician that does your blood work, right? Do you know what nationality they are? Do you know what their training is? The answer is no. You basically have a system that works in 188 countries all over the world, and you have to have confidence that it's going to work in the 189th country. The reality is that we do not have diplomatic relations with Iran, and as is the practice with other countries, if Iran does not have diplomatic relations with the United States, they're under no legal obligation to accept U.S. national inspectors. That being said, if we had any concern that the other inspectors, not from the United States, were not up to the job, we would not have allowed that provision. We would have said that the IEA gets to determine the composition of its teams, and that's it. But the fact is that all of the IEA's inspectors are fully competent, fully trained. Not only that, but the United States provides about 1/10 of the personnel at the IEA itself for their not just their inspection teams, but their technical staff, their support, their technical capabilities, their development, their training. And so, we have very high confidence that the United States will have the information that it needs through the IEA, and that the IEA is fully capable, regardless of whether the inspectors are U.S., French, German, Italian, Russian, Chinese, Mongolian.
Thank you.
Okay, our next question comes from Douglas Riley.
Okay, I promise not another comment after this, but it's related to, I think, some things you have said in your introduction and also the Israeli Defense Force colonel. It is very well known that Israel has a large nuclear arsenal and an impressive delivery capability, and they are not signatory to the non-proliferation, ratifying it. They have promised they would not develop nuclear weapons. That's my point. Thank you.
I think the only thing I'll comment on there is Iran has voluntarily committed to a legally binding restriction not to develop nuclear weapons, but because they violated that obligation in the past, the JCPOA, the sanctions were necessary to impose a cost, and the JCPOA and its additional terms that go beyond the NPT were necessary.
Okay, and our next question will come from Marianne Stein.
Hello, thank you for this explanation. It's very helpful. I'm wondering, I understand that AIPAC is flying, I don't know how many of our legislators to Israel, and we know that Netanyahu has been giving speeches both in our Congress and in other meetings. Have you and others who can explain these issues had similar opportunities to present to and be questioned by legislators who are going to be making these decisions?
Thank you very much. And all I can do is assure you that in a way that I have not seen before, perhaps with the exception of when we sought the advice and consent of the Senate on the New START Treaty back in 2010, have not seen an entire U.S. government marshaled to engage the members of Congress and their staff to inform them about what's actually in the deal and why we think it's in the American security interest and, quite frankly, in the Israeli security interest. So I'm sure there are a couple, but there are not many members of Congress, Senate, or House that have not spoken to, met in person, or been called by the President, Secretary of State, Secretary of Energy, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Treasury, Undersecretary of State. It really has been a very, very concerted effort to ensure that they have the facts before them and can be given the information to make an informed decision on this, so that they don't just rely on second or third hand or other points of view. We obviously understand that there will be differences in terms of what this agreement means for the region and the broad contours. You can debate whether or not on some it will lead to the world we all want to go to, but we believe when discussed on the merits, that we are better off by engaging, and we've done exactly that with the Congress.
Well, you may not want to answer this, but Chuck Schumer has said he's going to oppose it, and that he's going to oppose it because he thinks that we should go back and get a better deal. Is there a better deal?
I don't have to answer that because the President has answered that. The idea that we could reject this agreement, which is supported by the rest of the world, and tell our partners and the Iranians that, oh, well, we need a do-over now because our Congress thought that this wasn't good enough is a fantasy. The example we use is, even if you don't accept our worst-case scenario in terms of what happens to international sanctions if Congress rejects this deal, and you just assume the best case, which is that there will be some lessening of sanctions, that there will be countries like India or China that no longer voluntarily agree to restrict their oil purchases because they believe that it'll take too long for the United States to try and renegotiate another deal, then you're basically saying you need to get a better agreement with less leverage. And it's not clear to me in what world you can get more with less with the Iranians. And so the fact is that this is a deal that we have worked on not for 2 years, not for 7 years, but that we have been trying to build an international consensus around since the late 1980s. And this is the deal. And we either get this and we prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, or we have no deal and Iran is freed up from sanctions and has a robust nuclear program that could build a nuclear weapon in short order. Or, as the President has said, if we're going to mean what we say, that we will not allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon, then you're looking at the prospect for U.S. military action against Iranian nuclear facilities.
Jon, thank you so much. This is Rachel Bronson again. I want to thank you for taking time out of what's a very busy time, presumably, for you. And I know you have lots of talks lined up. At the Bulletin, we greatly appreciate your carving out time for us. I want to thank the Nuclear Threat Initiative again for their support of this particular conference series. We're greatly appreciative. For those on the line, I want to make sure that you know that the audio of this will be available, as will a summary write-up if you want to go back to anything that you heard. But again, Jon, on behalf of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, I really want to thank you for your time today and for engaging so candidly and honestly with the questioners that were able to ask you questions directly.
That's great, Rachel. Well, I thank you for providing us with the opportunity. Appreciate all the good hard work that the Bulletin does, and wish you good luck in the future.
Great. Thanks so much. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This concludes today's teleconference, and you may now disconnect.